Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us. We're super excited about today's webinar. We love the folks over at Codezero. Excited to have Narayan with us and Dinesh. Just a few housekeeping things before we get started. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. Narayan and Dinesh are going to do their best to kind of answer those as we go, and then we'll open it back up for more questions at the end of the session as well. If you have any questions post-webinar, please feel free to email us, or you can shoot me an email at sophia@civo.com, and I'll make sure that those get to our speakers. So before we get started, I just have a quick slide on an event we have coming up. We're super excited to be announcing our third Civo Navigate. So Civo Navigate this year is going to be held, or I guess this coming year is going to be held in Austin, Texas on February 20th and 21st. There's going to be over 50 speakers and 10 hands-on workshops. We're expecting up to 1,000 attendees, and we'll be announcing some keynotes soon, so stay tuned for that. But there's an awesome offer there for 50% off tickets. Right now, you can still snag some of those early bird tickets, so that makes these tickets only $50, and I know it's only going to last for a few more days, so definitely try and snag those while you can. Awesome. And then our wonderful speakers. So just a quick intro on our speakers. Narayan is the CTO and co-founder of Codezero. He loves the intersection of technology and business strategy. He has a passion for all things technology, and his motto is, if it runs in silicon, I can master it. With a career spanning desktop applications, web, mobile, and now cloud computing, Narayan has shipped products that run on numerous platforms. And then Dinesh is our CTO at Civo, the first pure play cloud native service provider with a background ranging from data centers to website development, cybersecurity, and hosting. I know Dinesh has a huge love for teaching others and sharing his passion for building products that seamlessly scale. So I'm going to go ahead and kick things off by handing it over to Narayan. Narayan, if you want to go ahead and share your screen, we can go ahead and start.
Thank you very much, Sophia.
Of course.
Bring that up in a moment right here. Make sure I get the right screen. There we go. Great. Thanks, everyone, for joining us from everywhere around the world. Dinesh and I go back. It's coming up over a year now, almost a year now, Dinesh. And we've been Civo customers for a very long time. And Codezero, this is some of our new branding that we're working on. This is about the joy of flow, which is really about developers, how they work, how they stay in flow and focused on what they're doing. It's been a passion of ours for some time now. And with that, I'm going to start with this slide here, something Dinesh and I get a chuckle on. It's a study that came out a couple of years ago by Sophos that developers are really only in various organizations, they're seeing they're only getting 4 productive hours of coding per day. And we can't know this in this talk. We're not going to show you how to get out of your product meetings and Scrum meetings, but the big part of this study was having to deal with infrastructure and infra issues and just getting your environment set up for working. Dinesh, do you want to add something to that?
I think it's something that's just getting worse and worse, right? Going back to when we first met, like the demo you gave was really, really impressive. So it still sticks in my brain, that first demo and the first call that we had. So, I was really, really impressed with Codezero from the day that I first saw it. And I think using it over the past year, and definitely more in the past few months, it's really, really, really sped us up with our development. And in particular, this problem, right? Because we started off with a very, very small team that were all very good, great, multi-skilled engineers that knew how to run a database locally, how to run a Redis cache, and could spin up some Docker containers. But as we've grown and we've got more specialized developers, you get the questions of, well, this problem has started coming. My database isn't quite right. The migrations haven't run correctly. And then you've got 2 people now debugging someone's local database and trying to dump it all and put it on top of it. And yeah, just the amount of time lost now as technologies changed and we're doing more microservices. I think this is a problem that's just going to keep getting worse and worse if you try and run everything locally.
Exactly. And just to use an illustrative point, we call this, we've got a couple of slides that go into theory. We call this the blast radius issue. As a developer, you might be responsible for one of the services, And, we've got customers like a fintech company, for example. They've started with something very basic, which was, credit scoring, for example. And in time, the product complexity grows as features grow, as more capabilities come out. Even if you're just going deep and not broad as a product, you end up, as your product needs to scale, you add caches and things like that. So as a developer, what the service you're working on has so many adjacent dependencies that, and this just happens to grow even if you start with 2 or 3 microservices. We've experienced this. Next thing, and now when you start adding machine learning on top of things, that comes with its own cluster of microservices potentially. So your pipeline gets more complicated. I'm sure you experienced this at Civo, Dinesh, so maybe you can share some of your thoughts there.
I mean, that machine learning is a great example where it comes and Codezero comes into its fore, because now not only have we got different tools, sorry, this light keeps going off, which is the fun of being in this room. We've got different technologies. So as you've mentioned, like databases and caches, but this service that we're developing at the moment is our transcription service called Recite. So that has now introduced a message queue for the first time into Civo in our development workflow. So we're learning about how to use that. But we've now got a brand new team of machine learning engineers that are also contributing to this product. And, getting a front end developer to now run a database, a cache, a queue, API, their JavaScript front end, and now we say, oh, can you also run a set of machine learning models as please as well? And also manage it and keep it online. And by the way, my laptop is burning now because this one application I'm trying to develop is trying to transcribe 2 hours of audio. It's just it becomes insane to try and run.
Well, I did enjoy always going to our CFO and saying, I need the new Mac M3, whatever came out yesterday, because my machine's burning. But we can only do so much of that. So
it's the can I get a data center's worth of A100s, please, for every developer?
Yeah. And speaking of that, if you have a development team, looking at this from just a management and attack surface, we have production, staging, various, even with inference as code, feature branches have their own ephemeral environments now. One of your superpowers, being able to spin up Civo clusters very quickly. We are doing this in our test pipelines, where we literally spin up a cluster for testing and then dispose of it. And if you think about it, you could be in multiple cloud providers or even regions in Civo. But it's common to see the use of GKE together with Azure, AKS, and Civo and so on. And now you have these pre-production environments together with production. Your number of services that make up your application, that's exploding. Your dev team sometimes is in the as you're onboarding new developers. So the surface of everything you have to manage if you're in DevOps and tooling gets challenging. And certainly a lot of companies say, let's just focus on production. So I'm sure you're seeing this at Civo as well. So maybe you can share some of your DevOps pipeline.
Yeah, so we've got currently a development cluster that all of our developers are working with. And we have our CI/CD set up that if you label a branch or merge request, that particular microservice, every time you push to the branch, will get deployed to this development cluster, which means that we're rapidly iterating on this environment. And as new features or new almost API endpoints get developed, they're immediately available for all of our developers to start consuming. We then have a staging environment. When you commit to main, it automatically builds a new container, pushes it to staging, and we have a set of conformance tests that run against staging to make sure that all of the latest versions of main of all of the microservices are still playing nicely together before it goes out into production. And having all of these environments, there are definitely a lot for our SRE teams to manage and keep running. And then adding in feature branches as well, it's exponential.
Right. And you get to a point where data becomes an issue. So we've got companies that are in IoT and fintech Some of them are having to replicate data from production, anonymize it, and put it into their pre-prod environments. So the focus on production itself can get dangerous. Just about a month ago, Microsoft research accidentally released 38 terabytes of data. My understanding is this was in a pre-production environment where a backdoor was left open. So your tooling has to definitely take all these environments into consideration. So yeah. Now, one of the things I think you and I have talked a lot about over the year is about the scale where you have these environments and you have your local environment, and that gets replicated locally somehow. Docker Compose is very common here. And one of the challenges here is, you get things working on your machine, but it's not a true replica of the environment. Either the data or, the services are often mocked. So, and this is what we're seeing at CNCF, the microservice explosion. These are 6,000 member companies. You're seeing numbers in the 50s and even 200s. That's 2/3 of their customer base. And this mocking all this stuff locally requires a lot of extra engineering. So one of our approaches that we talked to you about was there's a lot of this emphasis on the container, on the application, the service itself. What if we took a look at the traffic as a first class capability? And today that's where we're seeing, with service meshes and so on, things evolve. So this is the approach we've taken where with Codezero, it sits adjacent to your CI/CD and build pipelines. We don't displace any of that, but we then work with your dev clusters and pre-production clusters and production clusters and work with the traffic flow. So
I think that was really impressive in the demo that you gave me a year ago, and the product's really changed over the past year. And I know that you've got another demo for us today, but the ability to intercept that traffic and do it really, really quickly and seamlessly, it was really, really impressive. But using it and the ability to have individual developers serve their own version of the application and have someone else have their own version of, say, the front end, and be talking directly to someone else's back-end service that's under development on their local machine it's magical when that happens. And you're on a Zoom call or on a Teams call or on a Slack call, and you're both debugging your own part of a service application locally and seeing traffic flow through. It's game changing on how to do like pair programming almost.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've been doing this for a while. This evolved out of our own internal tooling at one point. And the important thing to note here is we work at the network layer, so it's language agnostic, and so on. And so part of the thing is, in joining new projects when a new employee starts, this is some of the connection strings. You were talking about a Postgres database. You'd have a different connection for each environment. And having one, Kubernetes namespaces, and two, the ability to blend your local and remote, just even having services call the same thing across environments makes life a lot easier. But what you're also alluding to is the actual workflow, which, you write some code. If you're lucky, you have a fairly quick deploy pipeline, and then, your front end change, my API change, we can test that together. Rarely do we get it right the first time. Oftentimes a whole week will go by. And then with the new way, it's literally how do I work with Dinesh who's working on a completely different part of the system? How do we work together, code and test? And then once we've got everything lined up, we can do a deploy. So yeah.
Yeah, and it's been like fantastic working in this way of working. All I can say is it's game changing, because there's no other way of describing it, and having experienced it, it's so much faster and so much cleaner, and with multidiscipline teams as well, it allows you to bring these expertise. And if you've done any of the team theories about getting into that quadrant of self-sufficient and high performance teams, giving tools like this that allows them to self-organize and work out, I can see in the code that so and so had this commit, they're the expert on this part of the code, I'm just going to call them on Slack and let's just get something sorted right there and then. And
yes,
it's really, really powerful.
Yeah, well, we've been talking about it, so maybe we could jump to the show me. What I'm about to show you, we've got some capabilities that I don't think you've seen, Dinesh, that literally came out yesterday. So yeah, with that, we'll just dive into the live demo. So everything I'm showing you, you can do yourself. All you need is a Civo cluster, and on our Codezero website, sign into our what we call the hub. That's the central app.
Could you zoom that up a bit? It's quite
sure.
It's a little bit small.
Okay. Yeah, it's on our corporate site, codezero.io, and we have a getting started link, at the top right there. So that'll take you right into our application, and do give us feedback on the setup. I'll walk you through some of that today. And for the purposes of the demo, we have this sample project. We're not very creative with naming, so it's a sample project. But it's meant to illustrate exactly what we talked about. Front end, some back-end APIs, database traffic, all sorts of traffic. Yeah, that's what we'll be using to get started. Now, I've installed my local tooling. So the first step is to actually start the local Codezero daemon.
Can you increase that one as well? That's definitely
let's let me change my resolution, and maybe that'll give us a better oops, I don't want to rotate my screen. So bear with me.
And while you're doing that as well, the little demo application is actually really, really good because it demonstrates all of the tiers that generally a modern application kind of has, of that front end tier of a single page web app deployed to something like, you could deploy that out to Vercel or get it straight out from Cloudflare. Then you've got your API endpoints, you've got some internal WebSockets, some internal REST services or SOAP services, XML services, if anyone's using those still. And then, again, down into a database tier as well.
That's right. I'm going to bring up Safari as my main. I'll pretend we're using Safari as a developer. So I've got a Civo cluster and an Azure cluster with the same application. And if you're a front-end developer and you say, look, I need this core API, wouldn't it be nice if you could just go into your browser and oh, it's not HTTPS. So this is inside the cluster. So, wouldn't it be nice if I could just access this URL, or even do that in the command line. So if you've got a curl going on, I'm going to follow redirects just if there are any. Your machine has no idea what you're trying to do. So at this point, you would typically Docker compose and have to worry about that entire blast radius issue. Whereas in Codezero, we have this ability to come into a cluster and look at all the services that are in there. And I can say I want to consume all the services in that cluster. And immediately that traffic shifts locally. And you can see in the background, this URL now resolves the API's data is accessible. I can do that in the command line. I can do that in a browser, and I can definitely do that in my IDE. So this negates the need for running everything locally, where I can launch that front end, reference these upstream services. I can also use tools like here's Mongo Shell connecting to the Mongo database in the cluster. And I'm using the actual service name that's in the cluster. And so this is to illustrate that, it doesn't matter if it's TCP traffic or HTTP and so on. And what I'll do here is the service running in Civo, and just coming back, I can switch to Azure where I happen to have the same application. And I'm going to also consume all the services in Azure. So now, if you notice the host name here, literally in real time, let me see if I can get that side by side. I can switch between the two. Now we're talking different data centers, different regions, different service providers even, and I'm able to switch between Azure and Civo just by traffic shaping. So part of the joke is, we don't think in minutes and hours. Once you start thinking in terms of just working in seconds, it's really hard to stop. You start to get a little impatient as a developer when you end up waiting. So that's the headspace we're in. So yeah.
Absolutely. And you don't have to give your end users any kubeconfig here, right? You haven't interacted with kubectl at all. You don't need to know about Kubernetes ever, right?
That's true. Now, definitely, if you're a backend developer, you want to use your kube control tooling, kubectl, and so on. We're not big about saying, hey, you shouldn't know Kubernetes. You should know Kubernetes. But when you look at a team, you've got front-end engineers who are they're busy enough keeping up with what's going on in the world of React, let alone getting up to date with backend and infra tooling. So this is meant to be very easily consumable by an engineer, and everything I've shown you here is scriptable. We've got command line tools, so I prefer the visual just from an illustrative standpoint. So yeah. Let's move to a second scenario. That's really easy for an individual trying to access infra. We've got customers using this in AI, for example, where AI models are large and heavy and rely on big data sets that are often hard to replicate locally. So just consume them from within the cluster, and it just looks like it's running on your local machine. The other scenario that we're very interested in is the collaborative one you mentioned, where in this case, I'll be the backend engineer with this core API. Someone else has this front end, and I'm making API changes. They're making front end changes. Typically, sometimes you have webhooks mixed in as well, and that causes a whole other layer of complexity and queues and so on. So in a scenario where, or you could look at an example where something's broken in production, and you've tried as you may, you've tried to repro it in your pre-prod environments. You've tried to repro it locally. It's sometimes impossible. So how do you deal with that? And in this scenario, what I really want is to just work on a variation of this one service inside an environment that's production-like. So in this scenario, what I can do is let's look at this application that's been deployed. So if I do it's in the sample project namespace. We look at the service. Here's the IP address. It's not a pretty application, but it's great for dev testing and just smoke testing that our environment's working right. I brought up 2 instances of a browser, and this is the front end that every 3 seconds polls the various other services using this graph that I just showed you. So it's just fetching data every so often. And in this scenario now, the anonymous window represents either production traffic or the rest of your development team. The browser on the right recognizes who I am, knows who I am. So in this scenario, what I'm going to do now is find this core service and say I want to publish a variant of that. Now, typically you would deploy a new version of it, and we use the terminology variant to describe. You didn't want to clash with the term version. And here, what I want to say is route traffic to me locally, depending on the user. So the condition is the Codezero user. And when I serve this, the rest of my team sees that there's two variants of this application out there. There's the Codezero version and there's the Narayan version. Oops, let me see what. Oh, I've intercepted the wrong service. Fat fingers today, so serve the right
one. I guess while you're setting that up again, the older or the traditional way of doing this would be that you'd have to build a new version of your local container with the bug fix on it, deploy it out into production or staging, then update your load balancer rules so that traffic for a particular header, because it works via a HTTP header, rather than going to the main service, would have to then forward to the new service, or you'd have to put in some logic in your application layer to go, oh, if you've got this service and there is this deployment running, then don't process traffic locally, forward it on.
Correct. And there are teams doing this manually. They're going in and messing around with the service mesh and so on to be able to set this up. the danger there is, that attack surface you got to think about. Plus, as a React developer or Node.js developer, now you need to learn service mesh. And the reason, so what's happening here is the rest of my engineering team has no clue I've done this, and my experience is different than theirs. I'm getting an error because I'm not running that service locally. So let's try a couple of things. One, I'm going to bring up a code editor. And two, I'm going to actually start that service locally. And in this situation, what I can do is go to my code editor, find the service, put a breakpoint, actually attach to my locally running service, be stopped on that breakpoint. And I could, while you're making your front end changes, I could be debugging your session. And just to prove that, I'm going to hit refresh on both browsers. The rest of my engineering team has no clue I've stopped on a breakpoint, and the browser on the right is frozen because that request is stopped on a breakpoint. So we can, this gives you unprecedented experience as a developer using first-class tooling. I'm not having to go through observability logs and read the tea leaves and guess and find out what's going on. I can literally just step through the code together with you. Now, we're not collaboratively editing. I'm writing my own code, but I am getting to use first-class tooling to diagnose this. So, yeah.
And I think in combination with the first part of the demo, right, where me as a local front-end developer are consuming services inside the cluster,
Yeah.
I could have my own local version of the front end that I'm working on. I've made a change. I send a request out into the cluster with the user header that matches.
Yes.
And then that traffic is now sent to your machine that you've got your own API server with a debug console running on it that you're
Yes.
stepping through the changes. And it's like, oh, if the request is in this particular format or some change has been made, right, in the front end, you're getting this dev cycle into the cluster and back out of the cluster and back into the cluster to hit the databases and everything, and then going all the way back through again and bouncing between 20 microservices.
That's right. So in this case, I've the technical term being intercept, I've intercepted this, but I can also come in and say consume, and we've had this notation. So I'm going to say I want sample project leaf. So that's the leaf API, and now what I have is traffic in the cluster routes to me and then routes back out into the leaf. So you'll see in the background. So this service is running locally, but this leaf service is still running in cluster. So I can create all sorts of topologies. And again, we're talking seconds, not 30 minutes to set up and reconfigure your mesh. And just like that, I can say remove that variant, and then literally everything goes back to.
Have we lost Narayan or?
Looks like.
Oh, yeah. No, there we go. You're back, Narayan.
Short glitch. Sorry about that. Yeah, in this case, I did an arbitrary header foobar, and we're using this tool to inject headers in. And the nice thing about traffic is it's instant. So check that on, things change, uncheck that, goes back to normal. So if you even need to go, what's the experience of the API in the cluster versus what's the experience locally, you could flip very quickly. And then lastly, there are some situations like when you're doing, you and I do a lot of Kubernetes controller development, where there's webhooks and all sorts of complexities. In that scenario, you have the ability to do a complete hijack. You can say, I want to now make my local service the default service. And what that means is when traffic comes into the cluster, you'll notice the orders flipped around, and traffic will first try to get to my locally running service. And now across the board, and I'll just to really drastically illustrate that, stop running the service locally. Across the board, this would be the equivalent of like send all production traffic to me, or all dev cluster traffic to me. So you have a fair bit of power. Now, behind the scenes, we have a full policy engine that gives
I
you
was just about to ask, if, like,
yeah.
is my developer now going to start sending all traffic locally and issues around all of that?
Yeah, tools are powerful, but they can be dangerous too. But yes, we do have a policy engine where you can come along and define, Sophia can do whatever she wants in production, but Dinesh better not touch production. So those type of rules are in place, and that's really how you manage large teams there. So yeah.
Well, I think, yeah, giving me no access to production and Sophia all the access is definitely the safest thing to do. It will make me sleep a lot easier.
Well, that concludes at least the show me part. I mean, like I said, this is live now. Anyone can try it. To set up your Kubernetes cluster, it's under settings. Essentially, a Kubernetes cluster with Codezero deploy in it. We like the friendly term, a team space. It's now a team collaborative space. And if I created a new cluster in here, what you get is a Helm install link. Just grab that, paste that into your with the appropriate. This is where you do need your kubeconfig and so on, but this will install the appropriate controllers that we need. And once that's done, you're dealing. You can abstract away Kubernetes for your team, start inviting people, and setting up policies for them, and so on. So yeah. So usually onboarding is less than 5 minutes. I probably do it 20 times a day when I'm testing Codezero. Now looking at the entire landscape, and then hopefully we'll have time for questions. We have, you have your IDE on the far left, and then
Oh, lost Narayan again. I'm sure he'll be back in a second. It's all of the traffic coming from Canada.
Like his screen is still. It's like you're back.
Okay, great. I figured I'd just yeah. So on the left is all your IDEs, and on the far right are your managed clusters, where eventually your software is going to have to run. And we have our lovely CI pipelines that do everything from packaging to testing. And this is where the tension goes away. When our CI pipelines started becoming 40 minutes an hour, even running full UI tests and so on, the challenge with engineering was how do we cut things out of the CI so we could more rapidly collaborate together and do our integration. I make a small change. I don't want to run a 50-minute test cycle. But now you don't have to worry about that because it's really not part of your dev experience until you're ready to publish. And then you have things like micro deployments, which are really about moving small containers in, and there's some great tooling coming out there. And what we were thinking of this, thinking in terms of seconds, is that Omni development layer, where Omni being you're omniscient about everything that's not just on your machine, but on your colleagues' machines as well. So that's how we see the landscape evolving in terms of speed and cost management of just productivity and time, as well as the overall security surface of the dev experience. So happy to continue on. We're easy to find. You can reach us at info@codezero.io. We have a Discord channel, but I'm also in the Civo community Slack channel, so you can reach out to me there as well. So yeah, with that, I'll hand it back over to you, Sophia.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Narayan and Dinesh. We actually have a few questions that have come in. If anybody else has any additional questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. But I guess the first one that we have, and I'm going to let the two of you decide who answers this first, but what do you think about the comeback of on-premise?
I think it's a lot being driven by cost, is really the real reason, because there's been this promise of moving stuff out into the cloud for this infinite expansion and infinite scale at a good and reasonable price. And while I think we've hit the first two, I don't feel that the second one is really where people are getting value at the moment. And that's where you kind of see if I'm spending, $1 million a year plus on cloud infrastructure, you can buy a lot of hardware with that and put it in a data center. Now, there are other challenges with that, but from a purely finance point of view and where kind of the economy has been over the past year is, yeah, there's a lot of focus of pushing the cost saving kind of point of view.
I'll add to that. I mean, it really depends on your situation. For us, if you look at the cost of a developer's time, particularly managing infra, we just give everybody a Civo quota, and that makes life a lot easier. And everyone in our engineering team spins up and down clusters off our Terraform scripts as needed. So I think if you really do the cost benefit, it really comes down to your situation. But for us, it hasn't quite been there. We are seeing companies in like IoT and so on that are starting to do some on-prem. But I think that's the beauty of Kubernetes. You're not constrained. So I think that's why this was created, so you could have that same experience across development, production, cloud A, cloud B, on-prem. And frankly, why not do what works best for you?
Yeah, and Josh, you've got the question there about Terraform to deploy Codezero, and I know Narayan's got an answer, but I can say yes because I've been doing it. I've been deploying infrastructure with Terraform and then layering Argo CD on top of that to do the Helm deployments of Codezero tooling, getting that into dev stage. I'm not quite brave enough to give developers prod access yet, but Dev stage definitely has it.
Yeah, and likewise, so we run Codezero in our dev pipeline. So we are doing consume and intercepts right inside Docker to containers, right inside GitHub Actions. Then we run a battery of tests, and all of that happens alongside Terraform. Our agents are really tiny. Our controller that gets deployed in a cluster, I think there are two controllers. One is 20 megs, the other's 40. They're quite small, and our routers are, I think, 8 megs. They're pretty small as well. And the local tooling, you're running a tiny local daemon and a command line as well. So those are it's a single bash script that installs and quite easy to run inside. Like I said, we're running them inside Docker containers and action flows and so on. Yeah.
So, just one thing to note, I see there's a few messages in the chat. It looks like some people are sending messages to us to just the hosts and panelists. So if you are sending messages, if you can send them to everyone, that way people can see everything that's coming through. So another question that I have, are the numerous tools being created for DevOps good or bad for the industry?
John Narayan.
Well, I mean, I have, when I go to KubeCon and Civo conferences, developer tool fatigue is definitely real. Like, every week there seems to be something new to learn. But I think one of the things is, if you look at the TLDR, I think we can very quickly assess, is this something immediately useful or not? I do find when I'm dealing with specific domains, like when I get into machine learning parts of things, and it's like opening Pandora's box. There's another 50 tools there. So part of the thing is, how do we balance the landscape of being aware broadly of what's there? But I see individuals going deep in only specific tools. And I think, necessity is the mother of invention. Necessity, you get into a habit of, how did you even start using VS Code and these extensions? There may be 100,000 extensions out there, but do you really need more than 10 or so that you use in your daily work? So, but I think that's also the strength of the dev community and industry. There's this developers' time is extremely valuable. We are resources that are, hard to find in the industry, particularly in certain domains. And the fact that this tooling is being built for us is, I think, a great time to be here.
Yeah, I agree. That loads of tools are being developed because I think there are problems that developers are seeing, and we're in a unique position where we can see a problem and try and fix it ourselves. But for better or worse, spend 4 days automating something that takes 10 minutes. But we've all been there, we've all done that, right? But I think that's part of the joy of what we do as well.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so this one's more looking to the future. What do you think the next 10 years of DevOps is going to look like?
Oh, well, my thoughts are, I still think we're in the very early infancy of this pair programming with AI and so on. Honestly, when I started coding at 8, I thought coding a programmer, building software was plugging a microphone into a computer and telling it the game you want to play. That's literally what a child's brain thinks. So we're starting to see bits of that now with Copilot and so on. And I expect this entire field to evolve. Every time I go from one project to the next, there's a lot of redundancies. There's copy that Terraform script, make 20 changes to it and so on. You can start to see even that level of stuff getting automated and abstracted. So at least that's what I'm anticipating, removing all that mundane, tedious stuff that us developers don't like doing, and really, using our creative brains for the stuff we enjoy doing. So I hope to see more of that in the industry.
Yeah, I think agreed. AI, I think, is just the next tool on the list of stuff, because you go back and you say you want a staging environment, and it was literally going to procurement and saying I need a server for staging, and you order it, and Dell deliver it 2 weeks later, and then your data center team rack it and stack it, and then you've got to go in and configure it, right? And now we're in a world where you can get a container of a brand new OS up and running on your local machine in literally seconds, and when it breaks, you just delete it and start again. And AI is continuing this, of it's another tool that helps us be more productive and write more boilerplate code. So it's just going to get faster and faster, and it's really exciting. I'm really looking forward to the next 10 years.
Awesome. Well, thank you both. I think that's all the questions I have. If anybody else has anything, feel free to throw them in the chat now. But if not, then that looks like it may be the end of our session. So I really appreciate the both of you joining. It's super interesting. We'll definitely have to have a follow-up session at some point. But again, if anybody has any questions, if not now, after the webinar, please feel free to shoot us a message. I'm happy to make sure that Narayan or Dinesh get them, and we can get back to you with those answers. But thank you all again.
Thank you. See you in Austin.
See you in Austin,
Yes.
definitely.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Take care.